And now the PlayStation 4, a console over 10 years old, yet it's still going strong. Moreover, people are still buying it, playing on it, and new games are even being released for it. And this despite the fact that a new generation came out nearly 4 years ago, without the wild shortage and scalping that happened at launch. But why? For me, like many others, the PS4 isn't just a piece of hardware in a plastic shell, but a symbol of an era, where many, myself included, first entered the gaming world. That's why we can't let go of this console, but what about others? Is there any point in buying it now, and why? How does the PlayStation 4 hold up today? With these questions in mind, I dug it out of its dusty box to give it a retro review and try to answer these and other questions. Most importantly, is it even possible to consider it as an alternative to the Xbox Series S, a current console, but in the budget segment? If this sounds strange to you, just watch the video till the end. I'm sure it'll be interesting and, as always, useful, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and let's go. First, let's talk about the different versions. During its lifespan, we saw the release of the classic Fat version, the Slim, and of course the Pro, which served as a bridge to the PlayStation 5. It was with the Pro that we got native 4K for the first time, but that's not the focus now. The first model came out in November 2013, over 10 years ago, so it doesn't make much sense to consider the Fat version from a technical perspective. That leaves us with the Slim and Pro models. The main difference is that the Pro has more powerful hardware, allowing games to run in 4K, usually through upscaling, and often at 60 frames per second rather than 30. But because of that, it's also more expensive, which makes sense. You pay extra for better graphics. However, they're noticeably louder than the PS5, likely because these consoles have probably never been cleaned, let alone had their thermal paste replaced. So, you'll need to add the cost of maintenance, which will help the console last longer and reduce noise. In the end, the total cost comes close to the Xbox Series S, of course from the secondhand market, since we're also considering secondhand PS4. But the difference is that the PlayStation 4 is a last-generation console, while the Series S is current gen, still getting new games, often running at 60 frames per second, which is rare for the PlayStation 4. So it might seem like the video should end here, but things aren't that simple. First of all, PlayStation 4 can be modded, which Xbox hasn't allowed since the previous generation. And this is not just a way to access free games, but also many other improvements. By the way, secondly, to reduce loading times on the PS4, you can install an SSD to speed up texture loading and game launches, something that was marketed as a real innovation in the new generation. And indeed, when transitioning from the current generation to the previous one, loading times seem extremely long, but by replacing the hard drive with an SSD, you can fix this, at least partially. Thirdly, Xbox doesn't have PlayStation exclusives. Technically, almost all PS4 exclusives have already been released on PC, and if you have at least a mid-range computer, this is irrelevant to you, but still. If you compare it to Xbox, PlayStation exclusives are also an undeniable advantage, as PlayStation's exclusives are a form of art in their own right. Plus, new games continue to come out on PS4, although fewer with each passing year, but they still add to an already massive library of games released over the last 11 years. But to keep this video from dragging on, let's only talk about the games that have come out since the start of the 9th generation. In fact, various analysts are already calling the 9th generation a failure. It's no coincidence that the number 9 is considered unlucky in Japan. Many games are still being released for both the previous and the current generation, which wasn't the case before. Back then, after a year or two, games would start coming out only for the latest generation. But now, things are different. This is precisely why the PlayStation 4 is still in high demand. For example, last year, the highly anticipated game Hogwarts Legacy was released featuring an open world, nice graphics, and high detail, especially in Hogwarts. Of course, the graphical difference between generations is noticeable, but it's still playable. However, considering that this game was even ported to the Nintendo Switch, it might seem like an exception, but not really. Around the same time, Lies of P was released, a nice Souls-like game set in a darker and more deadly version of Pinocchio. Spider-Man Miles Morales is another game developed for both generations, but interestingly, there isn't much of a difference compared to Spider-Man 2, which was released exclusively for the PS5. Technically, if Sony wanted to, they could have ported the second part to the PS4 as well, but they didn't, for obvious reasons. They still need to sell PS5. So it's not surprising that exclusives are now only coming out for the current generation. Even so, Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, and Gran Turismo 7 managed to come out, and they look quite good, even on the fat version of the PS4. At least there's still plenty to play, not to mention the multi-platform titles. For instance, various Assassin's Creed games that came out before Shadows. Disco Elysium is one of the best RPGs in recent years. Resident Evil Village, though that's no surprise, since that they managed to port the game to the iPhone, so Capcom clearly knows how to optimize. Far Cry 6, to mention another game that came out after the PS5 launched. Little Nightmares 2, Elden Ring, another Souls-like, but on a massive scale from a legendary developer. Diablo 4, another iconic game. And even Atomic Heart, a game backed by Microsoft and available on Xbox through the Game Pass subscription, is also on PS4. We could also mention Cyberpunk 2077, but it still doesn't run very well. I'm not sure how it plays on the PS4 Pro, but I doubt it's much better. Generally, be prepared that if you get a PS4, you'll encounter issues in all the new projects, ranging from 30 FPS to blurry textures and environments loading right in front of your eyes. Although it all depends on the publisher's lack of care. But if you think that's all, let me assure you, we've only covered the games that came out over a year ago. Now let's take a look at what continues to be released. In the first half of 2024, games like the Persona 3 remake have already come out. The new Prince of Persia, the one with the side-scrolling camera view, which was initially criticized but turned out to be a decent platformer in the end, like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, the continuation of the iconic RPG series formerly known as Yakuza. Even Microsoft has started releasing its games on Sony consoles, including the unique survival game Grounded, featuring tiny characters. Although Hi-Fi Rush didn't make it to the console, which is not surprising since it's also not available on Xbox One. Plus, various DLCs are being released like Shadow of the Erdtree for Elden Ring, which takes about 30-40 hours to complete, almost enough to count as a standalone game. And that's it for the releases. However, we're still expecting the release of a new Call of Duty, probably the last one in the series for the past gen. There's also the sequel to the graphic adventure The Wolf Among Us 2, from the studio that shut down but later rose like a phoenix. There are also several Japanese-style RPGs in the works. One of the more interesting ones is Visions of Mana, and there are a few more DLCs for already released games. That's about it overall. Not a lot, of course, but considering the console hasn't been considered current for 4 years, it's better than nothing. And these are still releases from this year, but games were coming out before that too. The closer we rewind to the release of the PS5, the more games were released on both generations at the same time, so, as I mentioned before, there's plenty to play here. You definitely won't be bored. The console is simply transitioning into a full retro format, like the PS3, which has its own game library that's fun to play, no matter how much time has passed. The difference is that the PS4 and PS5 have the same architecture, so all 8th gen games are easily backward compatible on the 9th gen, sometimes even with better graphics. Meanwhile, Sony still hasn't implemented backward compatibility with the PS3. Although there are rumors that they're working on an emulator for that console until they present it, the PS3 remains relevant if you want to play certain exclusives that were never released anywhere else. One of those for a long time was the first Red Dead Redemption, but it was re-released last year on the PS4 and Switch, so there are fewer and fewer of such games. Essentially, the relevance of the PS4 depends only on your budget for games and entertainment. The PlayStation 4 is, in a way, a budget version of the PS5, with less functionality and fewer games. However, there's a small caveat, and that's the modding aspect. I've spent so much time talking about games for a reason. All of them can be obtained for free through hacking, which is quite handy for budget gaming. Of course, some people disapprove of this, while others strongly support it. But for the sake of objectivity in this video, it's definitely worth mentioning. Beyond free games, modding unlocks far more possibilities. I'm not even talking about installing Linux and turning your PS4 into a PC equivalent, even running games from Steam, but that's a whole different level of tinkering. For regular players, the ability to install unofficial mods is much more important. These are mods that can't be downloaded directly from PlayStation Network or through the game, and as you probably know, that's most mods. For example, recently there's Fallout London. Of course, no one guarantees the stability of such mods, especially since Fallout London is quite a large standalone modification. Meanwhile, other games get much smaller mods, from fan-made voiceovers or localizations to new skins and story quests. Nevertheless, if you want to play Fallout London, you'll need a gaming PC, as there are simply no other options unless Bethesda licenses the mod, which may never happen. As it stands, you simply can't play it on consoles, but if you jailbreak a PS4, you can install this mod. Of course, it comes with its own challenges. You'll need to convert the mod into a PKG file for PlayStation 4. But does it really matter if it's the only way to play this new mod on a console? And believe me, there are plenty of such examples. You can even play games that have been removed, like the old horror game PT, which can't be downloaded through official means anymore. But with hacking, it's possible. There are even mods that improve texture quality or increase the frame rate. All of this is only possible through hacking. Though for most people, the main reason for jailbreaking is free games. If you compare a hacked PS4 with an Xbox Series S, they're roughly the same in price, but their functionality is different. The Xbox Series S lets you play new releases that keep coming out, but for a price. Meanwhile, the PS4, although offering older games, provides them for free. As I mentioned, over 11 years, countless games have been released. Some might say that Xbox has an advantage here because you can play online games, whereas on a jailbroken PS4, online access is blocked. But here's the thing. As long as the console isn't officially banned, and according to forums, that doesn't happen often due to the specific nature of the hack, you can roll back to a licensed state and play online. And surprisingly, online gaming is in perfect shape. First, thanks to backward compatibility and cross-platform play, which allows players on different devices to play on the same servers, boosting the player base and making it easier to find matches. This is especially true for various AAA games like Fortnite, Apex, PUBG, and similar titles. The larger the player base, the more money they make, so they'll try to support games on older generations for as long as possible, especially when it comes to free-to-play games. As long as people are spending money, these games will continue to operate. It's more difficult with paid games like the newer Call of Duty titles or the solid realistic shooter Hell Let Loose, which only came out for PS5. But in this video, we're talking about budget gaming, and paying for online access and multiplayer for paid games doesn't really fit into the budget category. Fortunately, free games don't require a subscription for online play. So if we're talking about such games, their online player base is large enough that you won't be waiting long in lobbies. So even for these types of games, the PS4 is still worth considering, especially since they often try to optimize the game to run at 60 frames per second, though at the cost of texture quality and draw distance. But everything comes at a price. In the end, 2024 can be considered the last year of relevance for the PlayStation 4, when it still received new game releases. However, this absolutely doesn't mean it's time to bury it. Yes, if you have the money, it's better to get a PS5, you'll get everything the PS4 has, but with better graphics and more games. But if you're on a budget, the PS4 offers a huge library of games, often at low prices since most of them are older, or even free for pirates. And especially if you're just getting into gaming, you'll have several years worth of quality games to dive into since they've been released over the past 11 years. Plus, oddly enough, the console has been given a new lease on life thanks to modding. But still, if you're a hardcore gamer who follows the industry daily and keeps track of every new release, then it might be better to look at the Xbox Series S, which is similarly priced for budget gaming. You won't have Sony exclusives, but you will have all the current multi-platform games of this generation. Not with the best graphics, but that's one of the compromises that comes with a budget option. As they say, if you have the money, it's better to get a PC, where you can fine-tune the graphics to achieve your desired result. However, many people buy consoles precisely to avoid fiddling with settings and simply start playing. But in general, we have to admit that the PS4 era is over, and by paying tribute to the old-timer with this video, we'll no longer return to the topic of the PS4's relevance. The 9th generation is already gaining momentum. The release of the PS5 Pro is just around the corner, and I'll definitely make a review on it and even try to do comparison tests with the PC that you could build for its price. So subscribe so you don't miss out. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and see you soon, maybe tomorrow, right here on this channel.